I thought the best thing to do was actually to bring a therapist into the conversation to actually talk about mental health, stability, depression, anxiety, and self care. And so I didn't have to go too far because my sister has her own practice down in New York, New York, New York, New York. And she's a big deal, Holyfield. And so we're grateful to welcome her again to Congdon Street. She's been here a number of times. And so welcoming her again. Hey, Camille, welcome back to Congdon Street.
Oh, hello everybody. I can't wait to see you guys soon when all this Corona stuff dies down. So I'm so happy that you reached out and that I'm here to kind of talk about mental health and what it is, what self-care is, everything.
That's so awesome. Like, you're in the center of Corona too, Auntie Rona. Yeah.
Honestly, I think so we're in Harlem, and I feel like a lot of it has, like, we hear a lot of sirens, but I think a lot of the boroughs that are being affected, like the Bronx and Queens, so we're not hearing as much, but it is very grounding to hear all the sirens every couple of minutes.
Jesus, we hear them occasionally here in Providence, but I can only imagine just from the commercials I've seen what New York is really like.
Yeah.
So if you would though, tell us a little bit about you. So who are you? How did you get to where you are? Because we just finished a series on habits, and I think it'd be nice to hear for someone like you. We have a lot of amazing college students where we really challenge them on diving into who they are. And so how did you get to where you are in terms of practice, pursuing your PhD, all of that type of stuff? And who are you?
Yeah. So, well, first and foremost, I'm Justin's little sister, right? That's always gonna be my title. But so I went to undergrad in Chicago. I went to DePaul University, where I studied psychology and Black studies. And then I came back home to Milwaukee actually for a little bit and thought I wasn't gonna go to law school. I remember talking to you a lot about it. But it was during like Trayvon Martin and all the stuff coming out, and I was just kind of like, I don't know if that's for me, if the law is how I really want to make an impact. I've always been really passionate about Black folks. So I worked in Child Protective Services for a little bit at Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. And I found it was so, like, the stories of the moms and of the families that were losing their children, that did lose their children, that was what was most captivating, and spending time with them was really special. So that's what I was like, you know what, maybe I'll be a therapist. Maybe before people get into the legal system, there's something that I can do. So I went to Marquette University for my master's in clinical mental health counseling. And then I got engaged, moved to New York City, and I started my PhD in developmental psych. Big picture is just to center Black folks and Black women specifically, with birth work and doula, and somehow making a practice that's centering Black women is the ultimate goal. But I got here because I just wanted to help Black people. I mean, it sounds so cliche, but that's really what I wanted to do. And I thought it was law, and it ended up being therapy, and I love it. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. I think it's so important to. I think a notion of care is actually doing what our hearts drive us to do, right? Instead of doing what money always tells us to do. Because when we do what our hearts drive us to do, money will be there, right? And that's something I'm learning. I think we're all learning it with that. So thank you. So with all of that, like I said, we just preached on self-care. This month we're preaching a series on Jonah, on what it means, just all of that, suicide, running away, all of that. And the challenge I have with Jonah is that if Jonah had been in tune with himself from the beginning, he would have just went right to Nineveh, right? And rejoiced and then kept moving. And so I want to, before we jump into all of the fluffy parts of things, I want to jump back into love your neighbor as yourself. What do you see as some of the challenges in our world and our culture that stops us from caring about who we are, what our heart says, what our soul says, what our mind says? What are some of the challenges you see or have encountered while we say no to ourselves?
I mean, the first thing that I'm going to say is a very personal answer, which is capitalism. I mean, let's just be clear that, we have to work to to eat, basically, and we have to do things to survive. And so a lot of the things that I've been seeing, even in the groups that I run here in the city, the last conversation that we had was like enduring being a Black woman in the workplace, and how there's been so much stress and depression, anxiety, all the things wrapped up in just surviving, but they're like, I have to eat, so I have to do it. And so it's thinking about just the impacts of like needing to be sustained and the impact on our bodies and our mental health. And so for me, I think it's just the culture that we're in of like working, being productive, making money, being seen, being noticed, and just surviving that, really impacts our mental health in general. But like, yeah, I mean, that's what I've been seeing, especially, is just like wanting to survive and like move up in the ranks. And that means, having to sacrifice yourself sometimes in the midst of it.
So in all of that, then how can we, because that's real, right? Because we have to go to work 9 to 5, 8 to 5. Sometimes some of us are going 8 to 5 and then 5 to 9, 5 to 8, right? So how can we, or what are tips that you have or suggestions that you might have on how we can practice self-care in the midst of a world that's telling us to do it, but then making us work so that we can't do it? Like how can we, or what would you challenge this? What would you challenge us to do in terms of caring for ourselves?
Yeah. So the main thing I've been talking about a lot is that, like, we're existing in a very dysregulated world right now. And so when you think about dysregulation, it's like trying to basically find your footing in an environment that's like chaotic, which is basically life right now, that like everything that we've known is no longer, or it's changed. We're losing people, we're losing moments. And so I love that you're on this topic, because the most beautiful thing that we can do for ourselves is regulate internally, which a lot of folks have been doing, is turning inward, or like, like figuring out ways to care for themselves in a very revolutionary way, because all of the stuff that's happening is so external. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is just remembering your humanness, which is just like, it sounds very cliche, like we're all human, but we are human. And the first thing is that like we're all kind of going through grief, and the grief looks different for everybody, but that we're all losing something, whether it's our routine, it could be our favorite coffee shop that we like go to, like, get some peace in the middle of a stressful day, whether it's like, our work buddies, I mean, whatever it is, or actual life, like we're all losing something. So it's remembering the fact that we're in a state of collective grief and loss, and it's acknowledging that and letting yourself feel what you need to feel to be human, basically.
Wow. Can you mention that a little about grief? Because I when it comes to, like, you talk about the loss, right? We're grateful that in our congregation we've had nobody pass away to COVID.
That's good.
And we've had one individual and some extended family members who've been affected by it. And I don't look forward to, I pray I don't have to, and I'm saying this to the church too, I pray I don't have to preach a funeral on this, but yet we're losing families, loved ones. We're not able to go to the funerals. My friend did a funeral, and literally he preached the whole thing through his AirPods, right at the gravesite, and people were lined up all the way down the street, and he preached it on a conference call on his AirPods to people, because they couldn't go to the church. The funeral homes have regulations, so that's the loss of the person. But what are some other ways that you are seeing, or ways that we can not just cope but conquer grief in healthy ways? Whether it's the loss of a person, jobs, people being furloughed, relationships. I'm reading statistics about the amount of married couples that are sleeping separately now, and so you got kids losing their parents, kids losing experiences, because as much as we like, I look back on it like it's prom, but if I think of I'm 16 and I lost my prom, right. I mean, that I've worked hard to rent what sucks, to get the limo, or even those who graduated from college. Like, you remember that, like graduating from college, your parents, your first gen, especially for us that are Black and brown, we got a lot of first gen students. So how can we work through, without us just like throwing a random graduation, how can we work through conquering and overcoming grief and loss right now without community?
Right. Well, so the traditional cycle of loss and grief is like you have the loss, then there's shock, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. But at this point in the game, like we're kind of, and I sent you the infographic, which maybe you can post while we're talking, but the reality is that it's all very messy, that there's no steps to like, okay, I lost my job. I'm really angry. I feel sad. Okay, I'm going to bargain with it. And now I'm better. But it's the fact that we're constantly cycling through stages of grief, like at rapid paces. So one day you might feel really angry. The next day you might feel hopeful. And the next day you feel really anxious. I mean, it's understanding that at this point in time, this isn't normal. This is deeply dysregulated. And so it's allowing yourself to not feel bad, or to not even like sometimes people are so used to, and because of culture and tradition, it's like, okay, I feel this way, I'm going to put this in a box and I'll deal with it later. But the reality is that we have to feel all the things. So maybe that's like taking a second to just, and this is a DBT skill, but it's just saying like repeatedly, this is life right now, and just saying it over and over and allowing yourself to feel the weight of that. And it's not trying. So I guess like my first step is just allowing yourself to really feel the waves of grief, of anger, of sadness, of isolation, of joy, of hope, of all the things, and not thinking that you have to rush out of it, but allowing yourself to feel it.
Wow. Yeah, that's I guess that's something, the weight of emotions, and I guess too for me as a black man, that's just something like it comes to emotions. For me, I've joked him. Well, you know this. I wrote a book, and so in the book I joke about how I just took that out on the football field, right? So I just was like, if I felt anger, if I felt sadness, you go to the Y, you hard foul a couple people, and just let all your anger out,
Yeah.
and just hit someone and call it a hard foul, or smack one in the mouth and all of that. And but when you don't have those spaces, so I think the same thing kind of transitions over into this moment. So what about, so one of the other things, I think I mentioned to you this on the phone earlier, was like, so when I have, in our congregation, we have a lot of people who are leaders, entrepreneurs. We're in a year of follow through. And so on one side, we have some individuals, and we're wrestling with the loss and grief, but also then we have people who are making the decisions on somebody else's loss and grief, unfortunately, right? So I have to lay you off. I have to let you go. Even I'm in that position. That we're not firing anyone at CSPC. Don't y'all email me. We're not. But even I'm in that position too, where we have leaders who are making those decisions. What would you say in terms of self-care for them when they're in the decision or in the space where they're looking at budget line items, like you said, capitalism? You're in budget line items, and as much as you care about them, and we are in this whole movement of adaptive leaders and collaborative leaders, but yet in this moment, the best way our business can collaborate, and we didn't get the SBA loan, is I've got to release you, I got to let you go, but I know you have 3 kids. How can we care for ourselves and also care for people that we work with and that work for us, when we have to make some really difficult decisions in something we can't figure out?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you mentioned it to me, I was like, I have to really think about this, because there's really no rule book to this. I think, just having sat with folks who've had to let people go, and just like the pressure of it, but also like the fear of it for themselves. I mean, I think the main thing that I would recommend is like really examining like what is your, like, to you, like what is your role as a leader, and like what does leadership mean for you. And I know that like when we think about like being a leader, it's like, yes, I'm gonna lead this team, I'm gonna make these agenda items, I'm gonna make these goals, but there's always a flip side to what it means to be a leader. And it's also understanding that sometimes it's making really hard decisions, and it's not easy. And so it's thinking about like re-examining and like sitting with like, what does it mean for me to be a leader, and what does it mean for me to lead through really difficult times? And I don't have like really the perfect answer for that, because it's not easy. I don't think letting someone go that has children, or putting someone on furlough, is easy. But I think it's like trying to tap back into yourself of like, well, I have the confidence in myself when I got this job, and when I did this thing, when I got the promotion to being manager, boss, executive leader. I have to also trust in that inner power to like withstand the really hard moments of this role of loss. And I think, again, going back to that cycle of loss, and of course talking to a trusted like clinician through it, because it's not just going to be as simple as, what is a leader to me? Okay, cool. But it's like, for like a baseline idea, it's like, well, what does it mean for me to lead? And I can lead through like hard times, I can lead through good times, but I also need to lead through these unprecedented times, and trusting in yourself that you have the strength to do it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I have 2 questions. Two questions off of that. Well, one off of that, and then one from before. So I guess when I think about that, there's one of the first things I wanted to respond with is so then what can we do is in general, like in terms of ABCD, to care for ourselves that are not the $500 manicure, right?
Yeah.
Like I mentioned in the sermon about how like a way that I care for myself is to go to a basketball game, right? So we go to a women's basketball game, but literally right now, I mean, like we
Yeah.
can't go.
Yeah.
The same thing with like going for a run. We can't stay at the park. Our Camden would love to go to the park, but he can't touch the jungle gym, right? And so we like literally are like skirting by parks and like hoping he doesn't see it,
Yeah.
because he, and the same thing of like even like hugging other kids. So we see kids in the apartment building, but like you can't hug them, right? And so but that's different ways we care for ourselves. So what are some tangible ways that are not the $400 manicure, that are
Right.
not the basketball game, that
Yeah.
we can care for ourselves in this moment to be sane with who we are as individuals in this season?
Yeah. So I guess like leaning off of that first tip of like tapping into your humanity and your humanness, understanding the cycle of grief, and that it's natural and normal to feel happy, excited, sad, joyful all in one day or all in one week, but it's like leaning into that. The second tip that I've been telling a lot of clients is get grounded. And I have this like in air quotes because when I say get grounded, so the way that I work as a therapist is through like embodiment. And so understanding that like our bodies are our compasses, that are guides through the world around us. And so the first tip is get grounded by activating your senses. And it sounds cliche, but like bear with me. It's really kind of liberatory when you think about the joys of like being intentional and mindful around cooking and smelling and tasting, maybe repotting some plants or feeling some dough in your hands, or like taking a really long bath, or just like really indulging your senses, because in many ways our bodies keep score. They keep score of anxiety, depression, sadness, whatever, but they also help us with feeling like a sense of groundedness. So if you can indulge your senses first and foremost, through the little things. It doesn't have to be a facial, even though that is a sense, but it can just literally be like putting on lotion in a very mindful way, repeating like this is life right now, and like really just like putting on your lotion and saying that out loud. I mean, it could be a lot of things, but my first tip that I've told folks is like get grounded and activate your senses.
Wow. Thank you. No, that's real. The last question I had for you is something based upon something you said earlier. Is so then as a person of faith, as people of faith, because one of the places I think where mental health gets wonky because we don't talk about it, right, is in church spaces, and it's how do we talk about the meshing of faith and mental health and self care, right? And so for people in our congregation, and even yourself as a person of prayer, as a person of faith, a person who believes in God, how can you balance both of those without it becoming this like originally, to tell you the truth, so when I first was going to preach this series, this sermon, I was like, oh, I can like do it like in a quote unquote therapist's office and lay on a couch, and I was like, actually I've never done that, right? Personally, I've
Yeah,
never, that's not the, yeah, right. So but that's the image that's painted, picture of a old guy or old woman staring at you and asking you these really really deep introspective questions, and then like you have this big memory of being 2 years old, and it has nothing to do with faith. How can we keep living as people of faith, and people of faith who are okay to not only pray, but has prayer being a part of self-care and care for ourselves, believe like that believing in God does not take away my faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we as people of faith keep our faith strong while being comfortable with being humble enough to take care of ourselves?
Yeah. So I have one more tip that I'll share in a second, but
Okay.
I guess like for me, as I think about that, it is getting like really firm about routines. And I think when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to depression, when it comes to really any like, mood disorder, things like that, a lot of things are based on uncertainty and fear of the unknown. And so, like, I could tell you many thought spirals that folks will go on when it's like, well, I don't know what tomorrow is going to be. And I'm thinking of all the things that could go wrong. And that will kind of keep us in our own world. And so I think people of faith have a privilege in a way, as the Bible says, cast all your cares on him. And this idea that like, and I remember you texting me this when I was in college. I don't think you remember, but I remember I was sad about something, probably some boy, or I don't even know what it was. But you told me that, God's grace renews each day, and that like his grace is sufficient for us. I don't even think you remember it, but I remember like walking into a psych class and I had a text from you and I was like, okay, I got it. But it's this idea that like God's grace is sufficient for us. And even if we can't see and we don't understand because we're human and we won't, and even me being a therapist, it's hard for me to help people sit in moments where, I mean, because I don't even know, right? Like I don't know what next month is going to be. But I have the privilege of being able to be in devotion with Christ and be prayerful and hopeful and trusting that, you know, he has the final say. This is not new for him, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we have a true privilege to be Christians in this moment because God is on our side, and whatever will happen, we're going to be okay.
Yeah. No, awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you. And that's helpful. I thank you. Is there anything else that you would want to suggest or want to share as we like we're in this series, including about healthy habits and self-care, and next month we're going into May as Mental Health Month. Is there anything that you would want to share or ensure that we know as people of faith, as individuals, as Black and brown bodies, in the midst
Yeah.
of all this pandemic?
Yeah. So going back over the tips, the first tip was be human, get grounded. The last tip is boundaries, which I think leads all into that. Like if you're able to understand the fact that, you know, you're human and that you're grieving and that, you know, you feel hopeful, you feel joy, you feel sadness. And the fact that you're going through these steps of maybe praying out loud to God, or you're doing things somatically to kind of regulate your body. The last tip is boundaries, which I think I've been talking about this so much lately with my clients and just with friends, that, you know, boundaries are like the guideposts. Like it's kind of like if you see, like if you're driving on the street and the sign says, slow down, road is closing soon, but that road never closes. It's the same thing with like, when we're like, you know, I'm really stressed out, you know, to your friend, I really don't feel like talking today. But they keep talking and you just keep allowing it to happen. And it's kind of like, all right, 3 hours later, I'm still on the phone and I'm pissed. And so when we think about boundaries, especially right now, because I think everyone feels so hyper available because we're home, right? We're home, but we're not necessarily available. And so, but I think like, you know, there's been folks whose parents will call hours at a time, whose friends will call and just be anxious, and that allows you to become dysregulated. So the biggest thing to do is to be firm. And I think it's being selfish. And I don't know if folks of color, we're not really taught to be selfish with our bodies, with our time, with ourselves, especially growing up in a Black or brown home. I mean, I think I remember mom always saying this to us, that like, you know, this bed isn't really ours, this room isn't really ours, you know, like it's not our stuff. So if she wants to come talk to us, she's going to come talk to us, right? But the idea is that being firm though in your boundaries is being selfish. And so it's saying to your friend, look, I really love talking with you, but you know, I only have 20 minutes today, right? Or it's just letting them know, look, I love talking with you, but I'm not really willing to talk about COVID today. I'd love to talk about anything else. But it's trying to understand like what that limit is for you. And so I'll send Justin and maybe during this you can kind of put it on the screen, but I'll send you kind of some firm tips. But the ways to really have boundaries is to, one, be affirming, pivot, and then also have some hard lines of what you need. So I'll put that on the screen with examples. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the main the main advice I have about that. But that's been coming up a lot for folks, and I see it with myself too. So
yeah, no, thank you. That's powerful. I guess the last thing, and sorry, this just came to my head. So we're the lesson I have a lesson we created for our children. Because one thing we noticed with even our child Cam is his emotions and his feelings are starting to be on his sleeve, and we have a lesson we're going through the book of Jonah with our kids too, all month. What I'm noticing is and now correct me if I'm wrong, but the suicide rates among teenagers is skyrocketing on a very scary rate to me. And I don't want to get too numb to that. We have a lot of kids and teens in our church. What would you say to them in terms of not just self-care, but just you know, the loss of spring break, loss of friends, but then not just that, but just that is the biggest thing right now, right? And so and knowing that depression, anxiety, and suicide. And we had, I think, a couple at a couple high schools here this year in Rhode Island that committed suicide. And I don't want to ever get numb to that. And I don't want that to get creep into our space. So what can we do? So I know we can do that in terms of professionally. Would you apply the same thing to teenagers? And how would that apply differently to teens and little ones who, like you're right, that door better stay open, right? But how do they communicate to their parents? Hey, listen, right now I'm not going to play video games. I'm not watching pornography. I just need to stare at the wall. I need to listen to Renegade. You know what I mean? I need to do something. How can we? Yeah, to teenagers.
Yeah, I actually wrote an article about this in the Successful Black Parenting magazine, and it was geared towards parents because I think that they play such a crucial role in teens and children. Because I mean, for Camden, like your home and you and Courtney really are his universe, right? Like you're the ones that's teaching him relationships early. You're teaching him what's normal, what's not. And so I hope parents are also kind of listening and being keyed into this. But for a lot of teens, like sheltering in place is also sheltering away or living in shelter from their lives. When children leave, like when Cam leaves and he's at school, I mean, he's someone else. I mean, not that he's someone else, but he has his own sense of identity away from, home. And the same thing, especially with teens, that their identity is really not in home anymore. It's with their friends, with their peers. I mean, biologically speaking, that is what's happening. Like it's peer support, peer approval, not really asking your mom for help, asking your friends. And now you're like in shelter from all of that. And so I think there are some tips that parents can be on the lookout for if their kids may be exhibiting depression or anxiety, like if they feel very keyed up, if they are more isolated than normal. I mean, yes, we're living in isolation, but if they're more isolated, if they aren't very talkative, if they're not sleeping well, if you're seeing sleep dysregulated. But for teens specifically, is trying just to be open. And I know it's hard to say that because parents also have to check themselves of my child is growing and they have needs that are above and beyond my understanding. But it's for teens, it's like I'm telling you that it's normal to feel really annoyed with your family. It's normal to feel pissed off at your family, to feel mad at the world that you're stuck at home and you want to see your friends and Zooms are never long enough. Or your partners or whoever it is that you spend time with. But I think the main thing is try and just talk to your parents openly. Say, look, Mom, I need some time to myself. I love you. I'm okay. I just want to spend tonight by myself. Or I would like to, create time in my routine to FaceTime my friends. Like I have to do that every day. It's just really important to me. But my call to parents would be is listen to your kids. And be democratic with your routines. Don't say you have to do this, you have to do that, but let them kind of create some routines too. But yeah, I think like it's a two-way street. As parents have to allow children to be free and like have identity, and young people have to also like lean into their voice of, hey Mom, I just really need this from you right now. And it's not really, maybe it's not eating that dinner right now. I just need to some time in my room. So
yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for this. This was powerful, enlightening, and I pray that every person listening and watching is blessed immensely by this. Let me ask the last thing: how can we get in contact with you, and what are you doing, and all of that? Because we've been blessed on both the podcast as well as our online service to reach people all the way to New York too, which is really cool. We actually someone who gave their life over to Christ is from New York and joined our online church, and which is really cool. And so I'm excited about it. And so if someone wanted to get in contact with you, even in the midst of this or the future, if they had questions, follow up with you, how can we reach out to you? Where are you? All that type of stuff.
Yeah, you can reach me at Therapy with C as in Camille, on Instagram, on my website. Like that's like the best way to contact me. I do have some groups and some like low cost options for folks, all virtual. So I'm trying to do my best to like, plug into the community and the needs. So Therapy with C across all platforms. I'm based in Manhattan in Herald Square. So, but if outside opens back up, yes, that's where I'll be. But if not, I'll be accessible via Therapy with C.
Perfect. Awesome. Camille, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all this. This is awesome. And that information that Camille sends over will be on the email that goes out after worship. Also, for those of you watching on the podcast, it'll be in the show notes. You guys are able to access that and reach out to her with all the information there too. So Camille, thank you. We're going to stop the recording in a second.
Okay.